We now know that there were at least 3 families of biblical texts, and what you have picked in most of your Bibles is just one of these families, but they weren't all saying the same thing. We know there are 3 different traditions. Let me talk about the big J now. Jesus, of course, is central to Christianity. And the first major assault on the historicity of Jesus was in 1768 by a man named Herman Reimarus. He was so afraid of what he was going to say, he didn't write under his own name. In fact, somebody else published his stuff later. And he was the first to say, I don't think that the Bible version of the story of Jesus is quite accurate. In fact, I think that Jesus was a failed revolutionary, and his disciples weren't willing to admit that he was a failed revolutionary. He was killed, and so they made up the story that he was still alive. Kind of an Elvis thing. People just can't let go of Elvis. He's somewhere. Just, you got to find him. Could be in Minot. I'll leave the building in a little while. So. The James ossuary was thought, here we have proof. Here we have proof that there was a Jesus in the first century. Why? Because we found a box with the inscription that says, James, the son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. Well, there can't be that many James, the son of Joseph, and have a brother named Jesus. This has to be the Jesus of the Bible. So that would be the earliest mention of Jesus in history. Now, we do have something from the first century mentioning Jesus. Right now, we have nothing. The problem was that the inscription was declared a forgery by the Israel Antiquities Authority. They're still litigating it in Israel. I actually met the person accused of this very briefly in Toronto, where this was exhibited. And among the evidence against him is a laboratory with half-made objects. Objects in different stages of completion. Which, he still denies, well, I was just cleaning. The earliest actual evidence for anything about Jesus is this little fragment, which I talked to you about yesterday. It's called P52. P52 is basically what you see there. Jesus is not mentioned anywhere. If you can read Greek, you see there's no Jesus there. Presumably, he is there in the missing parts because, we can identify it's part of John, probably does have Jesus in the missing parts. But this dates from the 2nd century, 125. That's the earliest thing we have of anything called the New Testament. Everything else comes from the 3rd and 4th centuries. So, if you're doing history, you might say, well, what about Josephus and what about Tacitus? Don't they mention Jesus? Well, yes, but a dirty little secret of Roman history is what Dr. John Meyer, a Catholic historian, admits. He says, as with Josephus, so with Tacitus, our observations must be tempered by the fact that the earliest manuscripts of the annals come from the 11th century. Of course, he puts it in a footnote. He doesn't highlight it in the text. Everything we know about Roman history that mentions Jesus actually is from the Middle Ages. Now, who do you think kept those manuscripts? It was Christians who transmitted those manuscripts. How do we know what they added and subtracted? Well, we don't. So how can we use something from the Middle Ages to prove something happened 1,000 years earlier? Well, we shouldn't, and we can't. The fact is you have a gap, a major gap between 30 and then the first mention of anything with Jesus. Now, how do we know anything was added or subtracted in that gap? We don't. So now we come to where are archaeologists now? Well, Deaver has become a minimalist. A minimalist is a historian that only accepts things for which there is independent evidence. So they would say, I will only accept the very minimum of things that are mentioned in the Bible, and only when there's independent evidence. And he used to hate the minimalist, Deaver. And now he says in 2007, I wrote to frustrate biblical minimalists, and then I became one of them. So it seems as though the transition to a minimalist view of history is almost complete. So here are my conclusions. The Bible is not relevant to the modern world for the reasons I mentioned. Its values, its view of nature, and the view of the origin of the universe, the view of morality, is completely different from what most of us would have. Most Christians don't read the Bible or even know what's in it. Yes, you have publishers that say, oh, but how come we're selling so many Bibles? The true test is how many are reading the Bibles being sold. And the answer is not very many. People use it as a cultural artifact in their house. You just have a Bible. That's what you do, because that's what biblical publishers want you to do, because that keeps them in business, see? Scholars need to focus, therefore, on moving people completely beyond this book. If you're going to be a good biblical scholar, to me, is you want to help people go beyond the Bible, not keep it as an authority. You have to liberate yourself from the idea that any ancient text should be an authority in the modern world, because that also leads to a lot of other problems, like violence, which I have written another book about. Now, if you want, of course, further details, I'll just have a shameless plug here for my book, which goes systematically through every field of biblical studies and shows you how it's still permeated with religious assumptions that true historians would not have in any other field. When you study Greek history, when you study Roman history, you don't have those assumptions, that Zeus is actually doing things, or that Mars is actually causing wars. But it's only in biblical scholarship where you seem to have that idea that God is still acting through history somehow. And I should mention also that my newest book, I actually have 8 books, 6 solely published, 2 edited. And this is the newest book. I didn't edit this one. I have 2 chapters in it, though. It includes other contributors like Richard Carey and Robert Price. I have 2 chapters. One is on morality and the Old Testament. Is Yahweh a moral monster is the name. And the second is a chapter on, did Darwinism lead to the Holocaust? Very, very common. How many of you have heard of this? Because of Darwinism, we have the Holocaust. And so that chapter aims to refute that idea, especially as voiced by Dinesh D'Souza. Any questions? Any questions, accusations, vituperations?